Alright guys, so we're going to talk about how we can make these kind of custom buttons that you can see all over this beautiful Lamborghini steering wheel. You can see we have some arrows, some lights, some up and down arrows. We have some text over here. We have all these different buttons that we painted. They're custom buttons. So I'm going to show you exactly how I did this. And the main idea is that this is just a texture painting using a special type of stencil that we can either download or create ourselves. So we're going to texture paint those kind of stencils over very simple material that we have on these buttons over here, right? So if you're not familiar with texture painting, stay tuned because that's exactly what we're going to talk about here today, okay? Now I'm going to remove this material that I have over here on these buttons just because we're going to start from scratch, okay? And I'm going to show you exactly what kind of image it is that we need, okay? I have my little button icons over here. I have my little stencil loaded somewhere in here. And as you can see, we have a transparent background with a bunch of little white icons all over it. Alright, and this is really important because when we use this as a stencil in texture painting, that means that anytime we paint over this, there's going to be nothing in the background, which means we're going to keep the same color of the background, but we're going to have white buttons or white icons painted on top of that background, okay? So I'm going to show you in a minute how I created this, alright? So first of all, we're going to select these buttons over here, and we're going to add a new material to them, and we're going to name this material something like buttons, alright? Buttons. And then in the base color, we can just set the material to black, but we're gonna replace this with an image anyway, so it doesn't really matter. The idea is that you can just see that now these buttons are black, so their base texture is pretty much ready to go. We just need to paint something over them, okay? So we're gonna have to replace this base color with an image texture, alright? So we're gonna go ahead and add an image texture node. And in this image texture node, we can create a new image with this button right here, okay? So you can see it opens up a menu called New Image. We're gonna name that something like Icons. And we're going to crank up the resolution a little bit to something like 2048 or something, just so we have a little bit higher quality. You have to make sure that the color here is set to black, alright, because that means we're going to have this kind of base color, okay? We don't want red or anything like that. Maybe you want red buttons, but in this case, I need black buttons for my steering wheel, so I'm just going to go with a fully black color here. The generated type has to be on black. You can't have any of these others. It has to be on blank. And just leave all these little boxes as default, as you can see over here, okay? Now, if we press OK, we're gonna create a new image. You can open it up here in this side menu over here. We named it icons. So if you find an icons image over here, you can see it's just a perfectly blank black image. So now we can use this image texture node to plug that image into the base color like this, right? As you can see, there's no visible change because we already had a black color here. But if this was white before and we plug this in, suddenly it turns black. That's because we have the image acting on this material now, all right? And now you can go around and make this a little bit more, you can try to add some metallic to it, or you can try to play around with the roughness a little bit, depending on what you want. I'm just going to leave it on default for now because it doesn't really matter to me too much. So now we have the kind of base material for these buttons, and now we have to start painting some icons over them, right? And the way that we can do that is using this stencil image that we talked about in the beginning, right? So I'm going to show you very quickly the theory behind how I produced this image, and then you can try to make your own, and then we're going to bring that into Blender and talk about how we can apply it, right? So I have PaintNet over here, but you can pretty much use any image editing program because it's going to be the same thing. It's very basic stuff. You can just go ahead and delete everything just so we have a transparent background. There's probably going to be a different way to do this in GIMP or something. In GIMP, you have to add a custom transparent background. We can maybe talk about that in a separate tutorial. But we have a transparent background, and now I have my brush, so I can just kind of brush anything that I want on top of this. You can't really see because it's a transparent background, but I can just draw any icon with my brush if I want to, and I can bring this into the program and texture paint it, right? So we're kind of making a little palette of different icons. In this case, we're going to need something like arrows, so you can pull out a shape like an arrow or something like that, right? This is going to be the turning signal. Then we can copy that arrow. We can make another arrow like that, and then we can just bring it to the other side like this, right? So now we have two arrows. Maybe you're going to need some different shapes like some triangles or something. We don't want to fill it in. Maybe we're going to set the shape to like a triangle or something like that, right? And you can just paint a bunch of shapes that you can bring into your Blender as a stencil. Now the problem is that we're going to have a bunch of these little other shapes, like for example this limiter, like this kind of cruise control button, or some other stuff like this little menu and stuff like that, or these sprinklers and things like that. This is a bit harder to draw, so what you can do is you can go to Google Images and type in something like dashboard icon PNG or something like that, and you're going to find a whole bunch of different icons which you can use and bring them into the program like this and put them on your stencil. I can't show you how to do this on camera because I'm going to get a copyright bust for showing all these images on Google, but you get the idea, right? You need a PNG image, ideally you want it to be white, and you can just bring them into this image and compile it together. If you guys are interested, we can also make another tutorial, talk a little bit more about how exactly that works if you're struggling with that, but it's really straightforward stuff. I'm assuming that you have some kind of basic knowledge over image editing programs. But anyway, once we have this this image ready here, we can just save it as a PNG. All right, I already saved mine, and you can just load it into Blender, and I'm going to show you how. Okay, so this is ready. We're going to go over to our texture paint workspace over here. All right, you can see we have a nice black color on our buttons. And by the way, we can just switch to object mode with Control Tab. You're gonna have to make sure that these are UV unwrapped. All right, in my case, I really only need the surface on top here to be UV unwrapped. The other parts I don't really care about, so I can just select an entire loop around the flat surface where I need the button, and I can mark that as a seam. And then if I unwrap that, it's going to be all good, right? You can see over here, this is where the arrows are going to be, so I only want to unwrap this area. I don't really care about the stuff in the middle. But anyway, you can also just UV unwrap it as a smart project, so smart UV unwrap project, and it's gonna do it automatically. It might be a little bit messier, but it should get the job done anyway. But UV unwrapping buttons is always pretty easy. You just have to take care of the surface on top, right? So we have a UV map over here, okay, in the texture painting window over here. And we're gonna switch back to texture paint with Control Tab, right? And you can see we have our default settings over here. We have a white brush or something like that. Our default, by default, we shouldn't have this image over here. So by default, we just have a nice white brush, and we can just paint something over it. Now this default brush would make it pretty hard to paint custom arrows and dashboard logos or something like that, but if you can pull that off, then knock yourself out. I just figured it's pretty hard to be that precise with your mouse and with your brush or whatever it is you're using, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna load our stencil, and we can do that if we go into this little texture properties tab on the side. We can click on New, right, and we can just open up an image, and we can load that stencil with the icons that we saved previously, right? You can see it just loads up, it pops in this little preview over here. Now the background is transparent, but just in the preview it's black because that's how Blender sees it in the preview, right? But don't worry, because it still has a transparent background. Now down here in the textures, you're gonna have to click and select that image. Okay, for me it's already done automatically, but you're gonna have to select that image so you can use it as a stencil, and we're gonna have to set the mapping to stencil. All right. And then it's going to pop up here in the little 3D view window that we have. You can see in the corner, we're going to have this stencil here. It's also going to be on the other side here. Now, just for good practice, you always want to click on image aspect, because that's going to make sure the image is not compressed or stretched out or something like that. It's going to make the image dimensions correct and the proportions correct. So now the stencil is ready to go, and you can see if we move around in our 3D view, the stencil stays in the same place. So we can just bring this stencil somewhere so we can paint over it, right? And then basically once we paint over it with our brush, that icon is going to appear on the button. That's the main idea here, okay? Now we can get a little bit more control over this. In this case, we obviously want to be in front view, and we want to be in orthographic projection. So we're going to press the 1 button on the number pad. And now if we zoom in a little bit, we can bring this icon into place, right? We can use Control and middle button to zoom in slowly, right, like this. We can bring this button into place so we can get the right size and everything, and we can paint over it, and now we have a little light icon ready to go here. Now another thing that you can do is you can use your right click to move this thing around. It's going to make things a bit easier for you, right? So you don't have to move your camera every time. You can just right click on the image here, and you can drag it all over the place. And you can also press shift and right click, and if you move your mouse button while holding those two keys, it's going to scale it up or down, right, like this. It makes it pretty convenient. The other control that we have is rotation, right? So if we press Control and right click, we can rotate the whole image by as many degrees as we want, right? It's going to make it nice and easy to control. And if you want to set it back to default perfect rotation, you can just come over here and set the angle back to 0, okay? And it's going to straighten it out. So now you can just go all over the steering wheel and just start painting these buttons all over the place. And once you're done, you're going to have a ready to go steering wheel. So now you can just use a stencil to paint anything you want anywhere. You can make any kind of icon that you imagine. They don't have to be white. In this case, they all have to be white for my project, but you can make them any other color. And you can paint pretty much any sticker, decal, or you can make bullet holes, or you can make anything that you want using this technique, right? All you need is a picture with a transparent background. And once you bring it into Blender, you're going to be able to texture paint over it. So just think about the type of stuff that you could do with this. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.